The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyard as Captain Marcus Hartwell stood at attention beside the ornate gates. 23 years of unwavering service had carved deep lines around his weathered eyes, each one a testament to his dedication to the royal family. His uniform, pressed to perfection, bore the golden insignia of the Royal Guard, a symbol he had worn with pride since he was barely 18 years old. Prince George, now 12, had grown from a curious toddler into a thoughtful young man under Marcus's watchful eye. The captain remembered every scraped knee, every midnight fever, every moment of childhood wonder that he had quietly witnessed from his post. Unlike the other guards who rotated shifts, Marcus had specifically requested to remain as Prince George's primary protector, a request that had been granted due to his exemplary record and the genuine bond he shared with the young prince. That particular Tuesday morning felt different, though Marcus couldn't pinpoint exactly why. Perhaps it was the way Prince George had paused at his bedroom window, gazing out at the gardens with an expression far too mature for his years. Or maybe it was the subtle tension that seemed to permeate the palace walls, whispers of budget cuts and restructuring that had been circulating among the staff for weeks. As Prince George emerged for his morning walk, Marcus noticed something unusual. The boy's usual enthusiastic greeting was replaced by a quiet nod, and his bright eyes seemed clouded with concern. They walked their familiar route through the rose gardens in comfortable silence, a routine they had maintained for years. Prince George would often chatter about his lessons, his books, or ask Marcus about his family, but today the silence stretched between them like an unspoken understanding. The prince stopped beside the old oak tree where they often paused during their walks. This tree had become their unofficial meeting place, where formal protocol relaxed slightly and genuine conversation could flourish. Marcus positioned himself at a respectful distance, his trained eyes scanning the surroundings while remaining alert to any needs his young charge might have. "Marcus," Prince George said softly, his voice carrying a weight that seemed too heavy for someone so young. "Do you ever wonder what it would be like to make choices that truly matter?" The question caught Marcus off guard. In all their years together, Prince George had never spoken with such philosophical depth. The captain considered his response carefully, knowing that his words might carry more significance than usual. "Your Highness, every choice matters in some way. Even the smallest decisions can create ripples that affect others." Prince George picked up a fallen leaf, turning it over in his small hands with careful attention. "But what about choices that might hurt people you care about, even when they're meant to help?" His voice was barely above a whisper, and Marcus could see the internal struggle playing out across the young prince's features. The conversation was interrupted by the approach of the head of household, Mr. Pemberton, whose usually composed demeanor seemed slightly frayed around the edges. He whispered something urgent to Marcus, who nodded gravely before turning back to Prince George. The boy watched this exchange with intelligent eyes, understanding that adult conversations often held implications he wasn't meant to fully grasp. As they made their way back to the palace, Marcus felt a growing unease settle in his chest. The atmosphere had shifted, and he could sense that changes were coming, changes that would test the bonds they had all formed over the years. Prince George walked beside him with unusual solemnity, occasionally glancing up at his protector with an expression that seemed to hold both affection and sorrow. That evening, as Marcus completed his final security check of Prince George's quarters, the young prince called out to him from his desk where he sat writing in what appeared to be a leather-bound journal. "Marcus, thank you for always being honest with me. I know you could say things to make me feel better, but you always tell me the truth instead." Marcus felt a strange tightness in his throat as he responded, "It's my honor to serve you, Your Highness. Honesty is the foundation of trust, and trust is essential in our relationship." Prince George smiled then, the first genuine smile Marcus had seen from him all day. "Good night, Marcus. Sweet dreams." The simple words carried an odd finality that would haunt Marcus in the days to come, though he couldn't understand why such an ordinary exchange felt so significant. As Marcus made his way to his modest quarters in the staff wing, he reflected on the day's events. Something was shifting in their carefully ordered world, and he had the distinct feeling that tomorrow would bring revelations that would change everything he thought he knew about his role in Prince George's life. The next morning brought an unusual flurry of activity to the palace. Marcus arrived early for his shift, as was his custom, but found the hallways buzzing with staff members whispering in hushed tones. The head butler, Mrs. Morrison, passed him with red-rimmed eyes, barely acknowledging his greeting. Something significant had happened overnight, and the news was spreading through the palace like wildfire. Marcus made his way to Prince George's quarters, expecting to find the young prince still sleeping or perhaps reading in bed as he often did on quiet mornings. Instead, he discovered Prince George fully dressed and sitting by his window, staring out at the grounds with the same contemplative expression from the previous day. The boy had clearly been awake for some time, and there was a manila envelope on his desk that hadn't been there the evening before. "Good morning, Your Highness," Marcus said, maintaining his professional tone despite his growing concern about the unusual atmosphere throughout the palace. Prince George turned from the window with a sad smile. "Good morning, Marcus. I was hoping we could take a longer walk today if that's possible. I have something important I need to discuss with you." The formal language struck Marcus as odd. Prince George usually spoke more casually during their private moments, addressing him by name rather than using such careful phrasing. Marcus nodded his agreement, and they set off toward the gardens, following a path that led away from the main palace toward a secluded area near the old stone bridge that crossed the small creek running through the grounds. As they walked, Marcus noticed that Prince George seemed to be memorizing their surroundings, taking in details with an intensity he had never displayed before. The boy stopped to touch the bark of trees they had passed countless times, paused to listen to the sound of water flowing beneath the bridge, and even knelt to examine wildflowers that grew along the path. It was as if he was trying to capture and preserve every moment of their journey. When they reached a wooden bench overlooking a small pond where swans glided gracefully across the surface, Prince George finally broke the silence. "Marcus, what I'm about to tell you might be difficult to understand, but I need you to know that every word comes from my heart." Marcus felt his pulse quicken as he recognized the serious tone in the young prince's voice. This wasn't a typical conversation between a boy and his protector. This felt like something much more profound and potentially life-changing. "I've been thinking a lot about fairness lately," Prince George continued, his gaze fixed on the swans, "about what it means to have things that other people don't have, not because you've earned them, but simply because of the circumstances of your birth." Marcus remained silent, sensing that the prince needed to express his thoughts without interruption. "Last night, I overheard a conversation between my parents and several advisors. They were discussing budget reductions and staffing changes. Your position, along with several others, is being eliminated to cut costs." Prince George's voice cracked slightly as he delivered this news. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. After more than 2 decades of faithful service, he was being let go. He had suspected that changes were coming, but hearing it confirmed, especially from Prince George himself, made the reality sink in with devastating clarity. "Your Highness, I appreciate you telling me directly," Marcus managed to say, his professional composure holding despite the turmoil in his chest.
"When is this change expected to take place?"
Prince George's hands trembled slightly as he pulled out the manila envelope Marcus had noticed earlier. "That's what I need to talk to you about. They want you to finish this week and then leave quietly. But I've been thinking about this all night and I've made a decision." Marcus watched as Prince George opened the envelope and withdrew what appeared to be an official letter bearing the royal seal. The young prince held it carefully, as if the paper itself was precious. "I've written a letter to the administration requesting that they reconsider your termination. But more than that, I've asked for a private meeting with the budget committee to discuss alternative solutions." Prince George's voice grew stronger as he spoke, and Marcus could see determination replacing the sadness in his young eyes. "Your Highness, while I deeply appreciate your concern, you don't need to—" "Yes, I do," Prince George interrupted gently but firmly. "You've protected me for as long as I can remember. You've been more than a guard. You've been a teacher, a friend, and sometimes the only person who treated me like a regular person instead of just a title. I may only be 12, but I understand loyalty, and I understand what's right." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion as he realized the magnitude of what Prince George was proposing. The young prince was willing to use his position and influence to advocate for a staff member, something that could potentially create tension within the royal household. Prince George stood up from the bench and faced Marcus directly. "I know this might cause complications, and I know some people might think I'm overstepping my boundaries. But I've learned from watching you that sometimes standing up for what's right is more important than following rules that don't serve justice." As they began their walk back to the palace, Marcus marveled at the young man walking beside him. Prince George had somehow transformed from a protected child into someone willing to take risks for the sake of others, and Marcus realized that perhaps his years of service had accomplished something far more valuable than he had ever imagined. The afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows of the palace library, where Prince George sat across from Lord Chamberlain Edwards, a stern man in his 60s who managed the royal household's administrative affairs. Marcus stood at his usual post by the door, though he had been informed that his presence was specifically requested by Prince George for this unprecedented meeting. Lord Edwards adjusted his spectacles as he reviewed the letter Prince George had submitted that morning. His expression was a carefully controlled mixture of surprise and barely concealed irritation at being summoned by a 12-year-old, even one of royal blood. The silence in the room stretched uncomfortably as the administrator read through the young prince's formal request for reconsideration of staffing decisions. "Your Highness," Lord Edwards began, his tone patronizing despite his attempt at respect, "while your concern for the household staff is admirable, these decisions are based on complex financial considerations that extend far beyond personal preferences." Prince George sat straighter in his chair, his small hands folded carefully in his lap. Marcus could see the nervousness in the boy's posture, but also a steely determination that reminded him of the late Queen Mother, who had been known for her unwavering principles. "I understand that financial decisions are complicated," Prince George replied with remarkable composure, "but I believe that loyalty and service should factor into these considerations as well. Captain Hartwell has been with our family for over 20 years. Surely that dedication has value beyond what can be measured in numbers on a budget sheet." Lord Edwards shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He had clearly expected this meeting to be a brief formality, perhaps a gentle explanation of adult realities to a naive child. Instead, he found himself facing articulate arguments that were difficult to dismiss outright. "Your Highness, Captain Hartwell's service has indeed been exemplary," the Lord Chamberlain conceded reluctantly. "However, security needs have evolved, and we have determined that your protection can be adequately maintained with fewer dedicated personnel and more efficient rotating schedules." Marcus felt a sting at the implication that his role had become redundant, but he maintained his professional stance, focusing on the conversation unfolding before him rather than his own wounded pride. Prince George leaned forward slightly, his young voice carrying conviction that seemed to surprise even himself. "Lord Edwards, with all due respect, efficiency isn't the same as effectiveness. Captain Hartwell knows every detail of my routines, my habits, even my moods. He can anticipate potential problems before they occur because he understands me as a person, not just as a security assignment." The administrator's eyebrows raised at this unexpected eloquence from someone he still thought of as merely a child. Lord Edwards glanced toward Marcus, perhaps seeing him in a new light as he realized the depth of the relationship between the guard and his charge. "Furthermore," Prince George continued, "I've done some research on my own." He pulled out a small notebook filled with his careful handwriting. "I spoke with the stable master, the head gardener, and several other long-term staff members. They all confirmed that institutional knowledge and personal relationships contribute significantly to the smooth operation of the palace. When you lose experienced staff, you don't just lose a position, you lose years of understanding and expertise." Marcus stared at Prince George in amazement. The young prince had clearly spent considerable time preparing for this meeting, gathering evidence and building a case that went far beyond emotional appeals. Lord Edwards cleared his throat, obviously uncomfortable with the direction the conversation had taken. "Your Highness, while your arguments have merit, the financial realities remain unchanged. The budget constraints are not optional. They are directives that must be followed." Prince George nodded thoughtfully, then reached into his jacket and withdrew another piece of paper. "I've anticipated this concern," he said calmly. "I've calculated my monthly allowance and discretionary spending. I'm prepared to sacrifice my horseback riding lessons, my private music instruction, and my quarterly clothing allowance. These savings would more than cover Captain Hartwell's salary." The room fell into stunned silence. Marcus felt his heart racing as he realized what Prince George was offering. giving up activities and privileges he genuinely enjoyed to preserve someone else's livelihood. The sacrifice was both touching and devastating, representing a level of selflessness that Marcus had never expected from someone so young. Lord Edward stared at the paper in his hands, clearly struggling to process this unexpected turn of events. "Your Highness, surely you understand that we cannot allow you to compromise your education and development for the sake of a single staff member." "Why not?" Prince George asked simply. "If leadership means making difficult choices for the welfare of others, isn't this exactly the kind of decision a future leader should learn to make? Captain Hartwell has invested years in my development and protection. Don't I owe him the same consideration?" Marcus watched as Lord Edward struggled to find a response to logic that was both emotionally compelling and surprisingly mature. The young prince had effectively turned the situation from a simple budget discussion into a question of values and character. The meeting concluded with Lord Edward's promising to review Prince George's proposal with the budget committee, though his tone suggested he considered the entire exercise to be an unfortunate formality. As they left the library, Marcus walked beside Prince George in thoughtful silence, still processing the magnitude of what the young prince had attempted on his behalf. That evening, as Marcus conducted his usual security rounds, he found himself looking at the palace with new eyes, seeing not just his workplace but the home where a remarkable young man was learning to balance privilege with responsibility, authority with compassion. 3 days passed without word from the budget committee, and Marcus could sense Prince George's growing anxiety despite the boy's attempts to maintain his usual composure. During their morning walks, the young prince asked fewer questions and seemed lost in thought, occasionally stopping mid-sentence as if his mind was elsewhere. Marcus recognized the signs of someone carrying a heavy burden, and his heart ached knowing that Prince George was experiencing this stress because of concern for him. On Thursday morning, an unexpected visitor arrived at the palace. Princess Anne, Prince George's aunt and a respected member of the royal family known for her direct approach to problem-solving, requested a private audience with her nephew. Marcus was surprised when Prince George asked him to remain present during the meeting, explaining that the conversation would likely concern matters Marcus should hear directly. Princess Anne settled into the comfortable armchair in Prince George's private sitting room, her keen eyes studying her nephew with obvious affection mixed with concern. She was a woman in her 40s who had earned a reputation for both her charitable work and her willingness to speak truth to power, even within her own family. "George, I've heard about your recent meeting with Lord Edwards," she began without preamble. "Word travels quickly through palace corridors, and your unusual request has become quite the topic of conversation among the administrative staff." Prince George's cheeks flushed slightly, but he met his aunt's gaze steadily. "I suppose I should have expected that, Aunt Anne. I know my actions were unconventional." Princess Anne smiled, a warmth entering her expression. "Unconventional, yes, but also remarkably thoughtful and mature. I've come to understand exactly what prompted your decision, and I must say, I'm both impressed and concerned." Marcus remained at his post by the window, though he found himself deeply invested in every word of the conversation. Princess Anne's reputation suggested that her involvement could significantly influence the outcome of Prince George's appeal. "Your concern for Captain Hartwell speaks well of your character," Princess Anne continued. "However, I'm worried about the precedent you might be setting and the position you're putting yourself in within the household hierarchy." Prince George leaned forward in his chair, his hands clasped tightly together. "Aunt Anne, I understand there might be complications, but I kept thinking about all the times Captain Hartwell has protected me, not just from physical danger, but from feeling alone or afraid. When I had nightmares as a young child, he would check on me personally rather than just sending another guard. When I was sick with fever last year, he stayed outside my room all night to make sure I was safe." Marcus felt a tightness in his chest as Prince George recounted these memories. He had never realized that his small acts of care had meant so much to the young prince, or that they had been noticed and remembered with such detail. "During my lessons, when I struggled with difficult concepts, Captain Hartwell would explain things in ways my tutors couldn't," Prince George continued. "He taught me about responsibility by showing me how he took care of everyone around him. He never made me feel like I was just a job to him." Princess Anne glanced toward Marcus, her expression thoughtful. Captain Hartwell, what is your perspective on this situation? Do you feel Prince George should be making these sacrifices on your behalf? Marcus had not expected to be drawn directly into the conversation, but he recognized the importance of his response. Your Highness, while I am deeply moved by Prince George's concern, I would never want him to sacrifice his education or development for my sake. My role has always been to protect and serve him, not the other way around. Prince George turned to face Marcus, his young eyes blazing with conviction. But don't you see? You've taught me that protection and service work both ways. You've shown me that caring for others is one of the most important responsibilities anyone can have, especially someone in a position of privilege. Princess Anne nodded slowly, as if pieces of a puzzle were falling into place in her mind. George, what if there were alternative solutions that didn't require you to give up important aspects of your development? Prince George's expression brightened with hope, though he tried to maintain his composure. I would be very interested in hearing about alternatives, Aunt Anne. My goal isn't to create problems for the administration, but simply to find a way for Captain Hartwell to remain. I've been making some inquiries of my own, Princess Anne said with a slight smile. It seems that several other royal households are currently seeking experienced security personnel. Captain Hartwell's reputation extends well beyond our family. There might be opportunities for lateral transfers that could benefit everyone involved. Marcus felt a mix of hope and uncertainty at this suggestion. While he was grateful for any opportunity to continue his career, the thought of leaving Prince George after so many years felt like a profound loss. Additionally, Princess Anne continued, I've discovered that the budget cuts affecting your position are temporary, related to some renovations and infrastructure improvements. There's a possibility that the position could be restored within a year, if the right arrangements could be made. Prince George looked between his aunt and Marcus, clearly processing these new possibilities. What kind of arrangements would be necessary? That, my dear nephew, is where your willingness to make sacrifices might actually prove valuable, though not in the way you originally planned, Princess Anne said with a knowing look that suggested she had been developing a comprehensive solution to their dilemma. The conversation continued for another hour, with Princess Anne outlining various options and possibilities that Marcus had never considered. As the meeting concluded, he found himself amazed not only by Prince George's loyalty and determination, but by the young prince's ability to inspire others to seek creative solutions to seemingly impossible problems. The following week brought a series of meetings and discussions that Marcus observed from the periphery, watching as Prince George navigated conversations with various members of the royal household and administrative staff. The young prince had clearly inherited his aunt's diplomatic skills, approaching each interaction with carefully prepared arguments and genuine respect for different perspectives. Marcus was particularly moved when he witnessed Prince George speaking with other members of the security team, asking for their honest opinions about staffing changes and their impact on overall palace operations. The boy listened carefully to their concerns, taking notes in his small leather journal and asking thoughtful follow-up questions that demonstrated his growing understanding of complex workplace dynamics. On Wednesday afternoon, Princess Anne returned with news that would change the trajectory of their entire situation. She arrived with several official documents and a proposal that had been developed through her connections with other royal households and security organizations throughout Europe. George, she announced, as they gathered once again in the private sitting room, I believe we have found a solution that will benefit everyone involved, though it will require some adjustments and perhaps a bit of patience. Prince George leaned forward eagerly, while Marcus maintained his professional posture despite his intense curiosity about the developments. The Royal Security Institute has offered Captain Hartwell a position as a training coordinator for their prestigious program, Princess Anne explained. This role would involve developing curriculum and training procedures based on his extensive experience with royal household protection. It's a significant advancement opportunity that would utilize his expertise in new ways. Marcus felt his breath catch as he processed this unexpected turn of events. The Royal Security Institute was highly respected throughout Europe, and a position there would represent a considerable professional advancement. Additionally, Princess Anne continued, the Institute has agreed to a unique arrangement. Captain Hartwell would maintain a consulting relationship with our household, returning periodically to conduct security assessments and provide training for new staff members. This means he wouldn't completely sever his connection with our family. Prince George's face lit up with genuine excitement, but Marcus could also see a hint of sadness in the young prince's eyes as he realized that their daily routine would still be coming to an end. "There's more," Princess Anne added with a smile. "The Institute has expressed particular interest in Captain Hartwell's approach to protective services that prioritize emotional security alongside physical safety. They want him to develop a specialized program focusing on the psychological aspects of protection work, especially as it relates to young people in high-profile situations." Marcus was overwhelmed by the scope and prestige of what was being offered. This wasn't just employment. It was an opportunity to contribute to the broader field of security work in ways he had never imagined possible. "Captain Hartwell," Princess Anne addressed him directly, "this position would allow you to influence training standards throughout Europe while maintaining your connection to our family. Your years of experience with Prince George would become the foundation for helping other security professionals understand the importance of building genuine relationships with those they protect." Prince George stood up suddenly, his composure finally breaking as emotion flooded his young face. "Marcus, this is exactly what should happen. You've been protecting me for years, but now you can help protect lots of other people too. You can teach other guards to be as good as you are." Marcus felt tears prick his eyes as he realized the magnitude of what Prince George had accomplished. The young prince's initial determination to save his job had evolved into something far more significant, an opportunity for Marcus to expand his impact and advance his career in ways that would never have been possible if he had simply remained in his original position. "Your Highness," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion, "I am deeply honored by everything you have done. The fact that your concern for me led to this opportunity is more than I ever could have hoped for." Prince George wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, then straightened his shoulders with renewed composure. "Princess Anne, when would Captain Hartwell need to begin at the Institute?" "The position would start in 6 weeks," she replied. "This would allow time for a proper transition here, and for Captain Hartwell to prepare for his new responsibilities. It would also give you both time to adjust to the changes gradually." Marcus watched as Prince George processed this timeline, clearly working through the emotions of anticipating their separation, while simultaneously feeling pride in the positive outcome of his efforts. 6 weeks, Prince George repeated thoughtfully. "That means we'll have Christmas together and New Year's, and my birthday in January." His voice carried both sadness and gratitude as he contemplated their remaining time. Princess Anne observed the exchange between Prince George and Marcus with obvious satisfaction, recognizing that her nephew had not only advocated successfully for someone he cared about, but had also learned valuable lessons about leadership, negotiation, and the complex nature of problem-solving in adult situations. As the meeting concluded with discussions of practical arrangements and transition plans, Marcus reflected on how profoundly his life had been changed by a 12-year-old's refusal to accept injustice. Prince George had transformed what could have been a devastating career setback into an extraordinary opportunity for growth and advancement, all because he valued loyalty and believed in standing up for what was right. The 6 weeks that followed were among the most meaningful in both Marcus's and Prince George's lives. Their daily routines continued, but every interaction carried additional weight as they both knew these moments were finite and precious. Prince George seemed determined to absorb every lesson Marcus could offer, asking questions about leadership, responsibility, and the qualities that make someone worthy of trust and respect. During their morning walks, Prince George began sharing more of his own thoughts and concerns about his future role and responsibilities. Marcus was struck by the depth of the young prince's thinking and his genuine desire to become someone who would make a positive difference in the world. Their conversations evolved from the simple exchanges of earlier years into meaningful discussions about values, ethics, and the complexities of using privilege wisely. "Marcus," Prince George said one crisp December morning as they stood by their familiar oak tree, "do you think I made the right choice? Fighting for you, I mean. Some of the staff members seem to think I overstepped my authority." Marcus considered his response carefully, recognizing the importance of this moment in Prince George's development. "Your Highness, leadership often requires making decisions that not everyone will understand or appreciate. What matters most is that your actions were motivated by genuine care for others and a commitment to doing what you believed was right. Prince George picked up a small stone and turned it over in his hands, a habit Marcus had noticed he'd developed when thinking through difficult concepts. I've been learning that being a prince isn't just about having privileges. It's about using those privileges responsibly to help other people. That's a wisdom that many adults never fully grasp, Marcus replied. The fact that you understand this at 12 years old suggests you'll become the kind of leader people can truly respect and follow. Their conversations were interrupted by the arrival of Director Harrison from the Royal Security Institute, who had come to meet with Marcus about his transition to the new position. Prince George had specifically requested to be present during this meeting, wanting to understand exactly what Marcus would be doing in his new role. Director Harrison was a distinguished woman in her 50s, whose career had included service with several European royal families. She explained to Prince George that Marcus would be developing training programs that would improve protection services throughout the continent, potentially affecting the safety and well-being of thousands of people. Your Highness, Director Harrison said, Captain Hartwell's approach to protective services, particularly his understanding of the emotional and psychological aspects of security work, represents a significant advancement in our field. His experience with your family has given him insights that will be invaluable in training the next generation of security professionals. Prince George listened intently, asking thoughtful questions about how Marcus's work would impact other young people in situations similar to his own. Marcus was proud to see how naturally the prince engaged with complex topics and how genuinely interested he was in understanding the broader implications of their situation. As December progressed, Marcus noticed that Prince George was also making efforts to build relationships with other members of the security team. Applying lessons he had learned about the importance of treating all staff members with respect and consideration, the young prince began remembering details about the guards' families, asking about their children, and showing genuine interest in their lives beyond their professional duties. One evening, as Marcus was completing his final rounds, Prince George called him into his study where he was working on what appeared to be a formal letter. The room was lit by the warm glow of a desk lamp, and the young prince looked older than his years as he concentrated on his writing. I'm preparing something for you, Prince George explained without looking up from his work. A letter of recommendation that you can use in your new position. I want everyone at the Institute to understand exactly what kind of person they're getting. Marcus was touched by this gesture, but also curious about what a 12-year-old would include in such a letter. Your Highness, while I appreciate the thought, I'm not sure my new supervisors would. They'll listen, Prince George interrupted with quiet confidence. Princess Anne has already spoken with Director Harrison about the importance of understanding how our relationship influenced both of us. They want to know what made our partnership so successful. Marcus watched as Prince George continued writing, his young hand moving carefully across the paper as he chose each word with deliberate precision. The sight filled Marcus with a mixture of pride and sadness, knowing that this formal gesture represented another step toward the end of their daily relationship. Marcus, Prince George said, finally setting down his pen, I want you to know that everything I learned from you about leadership and responsibility, I'm going to carry with me for the rest of my life. You didn't just protect me from danger, you taught me how to protect others. The weight of these words settled over Marcus as he realized the true impact of their years together. He had entered Prince George's life focused on physical security, but somewhere along the way, they had become teacher and student to each other, each learning valuable lessons about character, loyalty, and the importance of standing up for what's right. As Christmas approached, Marcus found himself marveling at the young man Prince George was becoming, knowing that their unique relationship had shaped both of their futures in ways that would extend far beyond the palace walls. Marcus's final day at the palace dawned clear and cold, with frost covering the grounds that had become as familiar to him as his own reflection. He had spent the previous evening packing his personal belongings from his quarters, carefully wrapping photographs and mementos that chronicled more than 2 decades of service. Among his most treasured possessions was a collection of drawings Prince George had made for him over the years, simple crayon sketches that had evolved into more sophisticated artwork as the boy grew. Older Prince George had requested that their final morning walk follow their original route through the rose gardens to the oak tree, a symbolic return to where their relationship had first deepened beyond mere professional duty. As they walked, both maintained the comfortable silence that had always characterized their best moments together, though Marcus could sense the emotion underlying Prince George's composed exterior. At the oak tree, Prince George pulled out an envelope bearing the royal seal, but this one was different from the official correspondence Marcus had seen over the years. This envelope was addressed to him personally in Prince George's careful handwriting, and marked with a formality that suggested its contents were deeply significant. "Marcus," Prince George began, his voice steady despite the tears gathering in his eyes, "this letter is for you to open whenever you need to remember why your new work matters. It explains how much you've meant to me, but more importantly, it describes all the ways I hope you'll influence other people in your new position." Marcus accepted the letter with hands that trembled slightly, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of this gesture. "Your Highness, I will treasure this always." "There's something else," Prince George continued, reaching into his jacket to withdraw a small wrapped package. "This is something I made for you, with help from the palace artisans. I wanted you to have something that would remind you of our time together, but also represent your new beginning." Marcus unwrapped the package carefully, revealing a beautifully crafted compass with his initials engraved on one side and Prince George's family crest on the other. The compass was both functional and symbolic, representing guidance and direction for the journey ahead. "The compass always points toward true north," Prince George explained. "Just like you always helped me find the right direction when I was confused or scared. I hope it will remind you that you have the ability to guide other people toward what's right and good." Marcus felt tears streaming down his face as he held the compass, understanding that this gift represented not just their past relationship, but Prince George's faith in his future contributions. "Your Highness, I am more honored by your friendship than by any other achievement in my life." Prince George stepped forward and, breaking all protocol, embraced Marcus in a hug that conveyed years of mutual affection and respect. "You'll always be my first teacher about what real leadership looks like," the young prince whispered. "Promise me you'll remember that when you're training other guards." As they walked back toward the palace for the final time together, Marcus reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. What had begun as a simple employment crisis had evolved into a profound lesson about the power of courage, loyalty, and the willingness to fight for what's right, regardless of age or position. The farewell ceremony was attended by the entire household staff, many of whom had worked alongside Marcus for years. Princess Anne was present, along with Director Harrison from the Royal Security Institute, who spoke about Marcus's upcoming role and its potential impact on security services throughout Europe. Lord Edwards, who had initially dismissed Prince George's concerns, offered remarks that acknowledged both Marcus's exemplary service and Prince George's remarkable maturity in advocating for him. Prince George delivered a brief speech that surprised everyone with its eloquence and emotional depth. He spoke about the qualities that made Marcus exceptional, not just as a guard but as a mentor and friend. He emphasized how their relationship had taught him about the importance of recognizing and nurturing the potential in others, regardless of their position or status. "Captain Heartfelt taught me that true security doesn't come from walls or weapons, but from trust, understanding, and genuine care for others," Prince George said, his young voice carrying conviction that resonated throughout the assembled crowd. "His departure from our daily routine isn't an ending, but a beginning of something larger and more important." As Marcus prepared to leave the palace for the final time, he carried with him not just his personal belongings and new employment contract, but a transformed understanding of his own potential and purpose. Prince George's gentle choice to fight for him had created ripples that would extend far beyond their individual lives, influencing security practices and training methods across Europe. 6 months later, Marcus would receive a letter from Prince George describing how their experience together had influenced his approach to other situations requiring leadership and advocacy. The young prince had become known throughout the palace for his thoughtful consideration of staff concerns and his willingness to use his position to address inequities and problems. Marcus's work at the Royal Security Institute flourished beyond anyone's expectations. His training programs, based on the emotional intelligence and relationship-building skills he had developed with Prince George, revolutionized approaches to protection services throughout Europe. His most popular course, titled Beyond physical security, building trust and understanding drew students from across the continent who wanted to learn about his holistic approach to protective services. Years later, when Marcus was invited to speak at international security conferences, he would always begin his presentations with the story of a 12-year-old prince who had refused to accept injustice and had taught him that the smallest voices could create the most profound changes. Prince George's gentle choice had indeed spoken louder than words, creating a legacy of courage and compassion that would influence countless lives for generations to come.